What does it mean to live life to the fullest, train to your potential, and perform at your best?
Leave nothing on the table. That's a non-negotiable, is that I strive to be better every day. Because if I'm not on top of my game, how is anybody else going to follow me down the road?
Keep demanding more of yourself to live up to that potential and to stay hungry.
Training is progress. You know, when I look at the word training, I think of steps, baby steps to get somewhere that you want to be. And that is basically your life journey.
It's a mindset in itself, man. It's like, it's not just about, I know that for you, a lot of that's about the physical, but we're constantly in training, whether it's growing our skill sets, whether it's growing our physical bodies, whether it's growing our relationships, whatever. And all of that's a training ground. And that kind of goes back to the mindset that we just talked about.
You underestimate yourself and you don't even start. But then once you start, you often surpass what you thought you could do.
Perform at your best, mate. That's sort of what life is all about. You know, I want to have the knowledge, I want to have the fitness, the health, the ambition and drive that no matter what comes along, when that next phone call comes, I can just say yes. I don't have to worry. Just go and do it.
Yo, what is up, guys? Welcome back to the Live, Train, Perform podcast. I'm your host, Sean Kober, and joining me again today is my friend Kat Yiannakis of Macros, Muscles, Mindset for the next episode in our series on binge eating disorders. Kat, welcome back to the episode.
Thank you very much for having me on. I'm excited to round out our series here.
Always a pleasure. Just give the audience an understanding of what we're covering today. We've already gone through a couple of episodes where we're addressing identifying issues, having a look at the different components that come up when people are suffering from binge eating disorders or eating disorder habits. Is that what it's called?
Disordered eating habits.
Disordered eating habits.
Yep.
Got to get my terminology right here, but that's why I've got you on, because you're the pro. What are we covering today?
Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the processes of recovery through behavioural weight loss therapy and the psychoeducational components of binge eating disorder. So that is actually what we touched on last week. So I highly recommend people going back to the previous episode for this episode to make sense.
Yes. As always, we put these episodes out in a particular order for a reason, so that we can build the foundations and then layer upon that. So, there's some good life advice right there.
Cool. Yes. So essentially, I guess we'll just dive straight in. And today, a lot of it is therapy, but therapy focused. So providing some tools and techniques for people out there that have maybe identified with some of the characteristics of binge eating disorder or disordered eating habits. So when we look at the therapy side of things, it's really important to note that there are a huge variety of tools and techniques out there, and that some will work for some people and then other tools will not work for other people. So the process of therapy is ongoing, and the self-awareness and understanding that the process requires trial and error, that it's not linear, and that it's ongoing is a really essential component to recovery. So essentially, if you are really wanting to change, then you need to understand that it's going to be a bit of a process, and it's not a quick fix. Like, it's not going to be something that goes away in 4 or 5 weeks. This process for some people can take 4 to 5 years. So I just wanted that to be a little bit of a guideline for people when they're attacking these issues.
Is that because these issues come up and manifest themselves in many different ways and are caused by many different things?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about eating disorders is that they're incredibly complex. So when we look at the different components of why, for example, binge eating disorder happens, and we'll go through this today, you'll gain a sense of how things overlap and why so much of it requires literally unraveling. So some of the components overlap with each other, like a habit loop ends up becoming a language scenario, and the language scenario then can stem off into how you speak to yourself, which can cause a comorbidity. So there's so many different things that can happen with eating disorders that the process requires that trial and error with different tools and techniques. Because as I said, some things might work for someone straight off the bat, and then other people will be like, well, that didn't work, so back to the drawing board.
Yeah, gotcha. So obviously we get a lot of people asking us questions in the fitness industry around like different diets and training modalities and all that type of stuff. And like the answer is, it depends, right? Because every single person's different. Like what's causing this and like what are the symptoms? Like we need to start addressing, yes, we may need to start addressing some of the symptoms, but we also need to be looking at what's causing it.
Exactly. So that's where Macros Muscles Mindset kind of comes into the picture. So we focus on the psychoeducational component of recovery as well as behavioural weight loss therapy techniques. So with the behavioural weight loss side of things, I'll just briefly touch on it because this is some of the stuff that you cover in your podcast as well with, other coaches and with the information that you give out. So it's essentially tools to self-monitor and improve thoughts and actions around food, training, and body image. So we break this down into macros, muscles, and mindset, macros being nutrition, muscles being training and recovery, and then mindset being relationship with yourself and relationship with others. So, for example, things that fall into the macro category include things like basic nutritional understanding, the concept of macros, how to create balance on a daily basis, the importance of variety, the nutritional pyramid, developing tools for travel, vacation and events, and then literally developing food balance on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. And eating to support performance and health, I'm assuming that comes into it?
Yeah, and more so just creating balance, particularly when we're looking at binge eating disorder, because a lot of the concepts of binge eating come from like a restrict to binge cycle because of how and what we hear, what we see, what we listen, how we speak to ourselves, etc. So understanding kind of what macros are and the importance of that is really important. Trying to pull off concept of cheat meals, which I'll go into a little bit later, and things like that. And then we then delve into the muscle side of things, which is training and recovery. So concepts that fall into that category include stress management, improving sleep to better your food choices. When we're tired, we have less control over our prefrontal cortex or the motor cortex or motor center of the brain. So it's really important that you get good sleep, as part of your recovery. We talk about implementing deload weeks, tailoring training programs, understanding micronutrients for performance.
Mm-hmm. Yep, cool. Where do you want to go from here?
So the last one, with behavioural weight loss, I guess, is the mindset, which doubles into the psychoeducational component, which we're going to talk about. I think one of the most important things in terms of, weight loss therapy and considering, if someone is wanting to lose weight, is looking at improving just 1% per day and focusing on the day-to-day rather than creating an illusion really far out in front. So, when we're working with clients at Macros Muscles Mindset, we're saying, hey, let's just look at being 1% better than the day before. And that might be, you might sleep better than the day before, you might have a better conversation with someone the next day, you might, eat more vegetables than the day before. These little things all end up equating to being better than the day before, rather than being like, hey, here's a 6-week program, let's get shredded. It's more about let's zoom out on things and approach our weekly reflections like a fly on a wall and see what progresses you've made over 1 month, 3, 6, 12, and focus on things like that. So that's another big concept. Yeah.
So when you first take on a client, what sort of process do you go through to assess where they're at and then where they need to go? Is there like a generic process that you use, or is every single person different?
So there is like a generic form that I'll give out. In that form, I can identify whether or not there is binge eating disorder. And then from there, I'll have a conversation. I actually go through the binge eating disorder scale. So that's a standardized test. And then that allows me to recognize whether the person is sitting mild to extreme. So where they are on that basis.
On the spectrum, yep.
On the spectrum, yep. And then from there, regardless of whether you're starting at mild or extreme, I go through those psychoeducational components. So the starting point is what we talked about last week. And then from there is basically what we're talking about today. So it's finding the evidence-based therapy tools and techniques to provide the client, the family, or the support system the education needed for treatment. So when we consider treatment, we're always looking at 4 things, those things being achieving abstinence from binge eating, modifying dysfunctional thoughts and habits around food and body image, increasing insight to deal with conflicts and negative emotions, and then obviously relapse prevention. So to touch on the 5 things that we talked about last week, what I'll do today is I'll give 1 or 2 effective tools for people listening, or ones that I think that people listening will be able to gain an understanding and be able to implement for themselves. So the 5 concepts or the 5 categories are understanding the upper and lower brain, understanding habit loops, understanding the importance of language, progressive mindfulness, and neuroplasticity. So I won't touch on neuroplasticity today, but we'll go into the other 4. So I'll kick off where we started last week, which was the upper and lower brain. Now, with the upper and lower brain, it's the education around acknowledging that we are not our brain. So the lower brain sends a primal urge to the upper brain, and then the upper brain has to learn to act or not to act on the urge. So when we look at binge eating disorder, we have 3 major tools that we use to help what we call dampen the urge, or kind of reduce that want or need to act on the craving. So they are refocusing or riding the wave. The second one is relabeling, reframing, and then the third one is revaluing. So riding the wave is literally as simple as it sounds. With the awareness of the upper and lower brain and having that education, the power you have here is to try and mentally control the urge by writing it out. So it's not easy, but it is one of the starting points. So firstly, binge eating is part of a habit loop, which we talked about last week. So the cues to your habit loops can be social, emotional, physiological, olfactory, locational. The options are kind of ongoing. But if you're aware of something that is consistent, like the urge and when it comes, this actually gives you a power, because you can technically plan ahead to implement a fulfilling or useful task to help ride out the wave. So basically what you're doing is you're refocusing your attention. You're allowing the sensations to be present, but you're mentally controlling yourself to not act on them. So for example, if you're someone that finds that you tend to binge before dinner, or maybe it's before an event, and you know that that's going to happen, then what you can do is try and ride the wave by implementing something beforehand. Like, know that it's going to happen and then schedule something in instead. So that might be showering. It's something that I use. Showering, reading, cleaning. I've got a client that cleans a fridge. Breathing, meditating, calling someone. That's a really simple one. Just pick up the phone and ring someone. It's literally the most basic of tools. It's hard, but it really can help, because just knowing the difference between the upper and lower brain and the fact that it's an urge means that you can refocus your attention and plan ahead.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask, is there any research suggesting that there's particular things that cause these urges?
There is. Again, this links a little bit down into what we're going to talk about later about language, because a lot of it comes from or stems from what we learn as kids, and also how we are brought up. You know, for example, actually this is a good one. There's a saying that's starve the fever, feed cold. It's this concept that's used a lot, I think, in the US, but it's something that a lot of people grow up with, and it's this idea that, okay, if you have a fever, basically don't eat. But if you've got a cold, then, you know, your parents feed you get better by eating more food. Now, I've had someone tell me this the other day, and she's Texan, and she was like, I was so sick the other week, and I had this, my grandmother's voice in my head about feeding the cold, and all I did was eat biscuits and gravy, because that's what we used to do as kids when we were sick. So there's that
and a shot of whiskey.
There's the urge from the primal brain because of a previous habit loop. So things interact, which is why there's this complexity to eating disorders, because these concepts of psychoeducation all overlap with each other. So, when we're going through this process of riding the wave, what we want to then do is dampen the urge further by relabeling and reframing it. So this basically means identifying the message from the brain and the uncomfortable sensation that it comes with, and literally calling it what it is. So with binge eating disorder, when you go through it, it literally feels like you black out. Like you're not thinking, you're off. It's like you're a completely different person. So acknowledging this creates this distance between true self and the false brain messages. So relabeling the urge to binge to something else that reflects what it is, whether that be calling it an urge, or calling it chatter, or calling it lower brain talk, or whatever you want. As I said last week, some of my clients label it Susan. Someone that calls it Susan. I've got someone that calls it Maleficent. I call it the little bitch. Whatever it is, basically what you're doing there is using your own language to try and dampen the lower brain. You're just trying to tell yourself to turn it off. So you're acting on it by saying stop. So that then becomes easier to kind of ride the wave. So that's your tool of relabeling and reframing. So it's actually really good to recognize it and be like, I know that this is happening. I need to relabel it, and I need to basically tell myself off to not do it, because it's one of the ways to basically say, hey, shut up.
Yeah, just on that, I assume there's going to be varying degrees of success dependent upon where someone is on that spectrum. If someone's mild, then they're probably going to be able to relabel it, reframe it, and they're, typically going to be able to have a little bit more control over that. But if they're on a more severe end of the spectrum, then maybe that tool doesn't work for them. Is that correct? And maybe they need to start stacking things.
Yeah, correct. And, even for myself, I've had waves where it's been mild, and I know when it's mild, it is much easier for me to say shut up.
Yeah.
When I was in that period in 2015 where it was extreme, this tool didn't work for me. Okay, so this is where, again, things take time, because there is so many tools and techniques that you can use, but over time you can pull and use them at different periods. So, for example, this didn't work for me in 2015, but towards my very end of recovery in 2019, this is all I used. I was like, I just have to tell myself to shush and we're good. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings me to my next question is, how important do you think it is to become aware of these habits initially, and then try and catch things before it starts spiraling out of control?
So the studies say that early intervention, so within the space of 6 months, can increase full recovery by 73%. I wish I'd known this stuff when I was 20. So again, I think we mentioned this last week, when you seek help, a lot of the traditional therapies, they'll help. And I'm not by any means putting down the traditional therapies at all. It just didn't click for me. I found that the most useful thing was understanding these components and understanding how these 5 factors affected me on a daily basis, rather than me trying to pull things from the past and trying to work through stuff from 20 years ago, whereas I could work on this now by understanding the concepts of the brain. So, does that answer the question?
Yeah. So that kind of ties into what I was asking before, is sometimes you need to look at tools that you can use right away to address these things right now. And then maybe, if that's linked to something in your past, like a trauma or some form of habit that you've created from, 15, 20 years ago or whatever. So it's about finding that balance and using those tools to, sometimes you need to address what's going on right now and tell yourself, hey, I need to stop doing this right now. I know that this habit comes up, every time I get stressed out, or every time I'm under the pump, or any time I'm not sleeping properly, then, I typically fall into this habit. This happens. I feel like this, I get this emotion, and then, I go to the fridge, I go to the cupboard, and blah, 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 blah. We need to address that now. And that's labeling that voice, reframing that, and then conditioning yourself to not give in to that, right?
Correct. And that you've called it reconditioning, we call it revaluing. So that comes to the forefront of progress as you go through recovery. So when we're looking at the component of upper lower brain, the revaluing tends to happen towards the end. It's kind of when you feel more comfortable with relabeling and reframing. So this is basically recognizing that impulse and urges may be there for a long time, but you are aware that they're providing no value to you in the long term. So your goal is to continue to improve how often you beat the urge. So what we do is help establish this concept with different tools. And one of the tools that we used last year for a lot of people was the concept of an urge jar. Now, an urge jar helps monitor the amount of urges you have and recognize how many urges you have overcome over a certain period of time. So it's a very useful tool for people when they're at home lockdowns or doing quarantines or working at home, because essentially what you see is how many times you've overcome something. So with an urge jar, it's basically, a jar or a bowl or whatever you've got in the house, and every time you feel the urge to binge and you've overcome it, you throw something into the bowl. So whether it's a penny, a bead, a Fruit Loop, whatever, what you do, I've got people doing this. What you were doing is creating an awareness of how frequently the urges appear, but how often you've overcome them. So what you'll see is that if you do give in to an urge, you're able to focus on the positive of how many waves you've ridden out rather than the one time that you didn't. So you're creating a positive association with the recovery process, because you can strive to then beat how many urges you overcome the next time. So that's been a really effective tool for people. And then another concept on a very similar basis to revaluing is implementing what we call a consistency calendar. And essentially it's the use of I use a physical calendar. Some clients use the Google Calendar on their phone. But basically what you do at the end of the day is on a day you've beaten an urge, you use a plus sign. And on a day that you haven't, you use a circle or a straight line. And what this does is it allows you to reflect at the end of the month on how many urges you've passed. Okay, so you can strive to improve on that the following month. I've been doing this since 2015, and it's amazing to go from 22 circles in February 2016 to 0 circles for all of 2021. But what we want to do is make sure that you use neutral colors and that you don't use red crosses, big lines, thumbs down, or anything like that, because it's very negative, so we want to keep things as neutral as possible, because this tool is for reinforcing the fact that you've overcome an urge. So use light colors, light green, light blue, use plus sign, minus signs, things that are very neutral and don't look angry and scary. But again, it's another really good concept when you're coming into that recovery process phase of being able to be like, hey, my consistency is improving, I've overcome this many urges, awesome. That is reinforcing, a positive recovery process.
How much do you think the all or nothing mindset feeds into this loop? Because, in the fitness industry, I see this all the time, and I'm sure you do as well, is people, they have a big weekend, out with friends, birthday parties, weddings, whatever, and then, come Monday, they're in the gym, they're hammering themselves. By Wednesday, they're tired, they're burnt out, they haven't been able to manage their stress very well. And it's like, well, I'm not going to train today, and then I'm not going to focus on what I'm eating. I'm not going to stay hydrated. I'm not going to go to bed at the same time. And it's this all or nothing mindset, right? I think that all or nothing mindset sabotages people all the time. And it's like, well, if I didn't stick to my diet today, or I gave into an urge, then today's fucked. I may as well just write it off, do whatever I want, and then start again tomorrow. And I think that mindset sabotages people all the time. And in my mind, I always say to my clients, I'm like, the next decision you make is the most important one. Don't fall down that rabbit hole just because you've fallen off the wagon, so to speak. You've got another opportunity with your next decision to get yourself moving in the right direction, because, those habits can either build in a positive manner or build in a negative manner. And once you realize that, then, if you have one poor decision or less than optimal decision, then it's much easier to make the next one and the next one and the next one But once you're aware of that, you can stop that spiral, put the handbrake on, and then start moving in the right direction again.
Yeah, that is so spot on. And part of binge eating is a binge restrict cycle. So it's a similar concept of like all or nothing. It's like, okay, this week, there might be I'm just going to go with Instagram here. New Instagram influencer putting out a 6-week program of shredding. Similar concept. Let's go hard for 6 weeks, all out. And then what happens in the 7th week? You blow out, you feel like crap, and then it's like, okay, well, I'll just start again. So this next phase of the components, this feeds into it perfectly because it's the psychoeducation of habit loops, right? So understanding how the binge eating happens and how it can increase with different cues. So, for example, dieting in itself is a cue. Reading those things on social media can be a cue. And as I said, cues aren't always emotional. They can be locational, like airports, grandparents' houses. They can be physiological, so like the time of day, like before bed or Friday night. They can be sensory, from dreams, from sense, from memory, etc. So the concept of all or nothing in itself is a habit loop, right? So, we've got, and I know you do as well, but there's a huge variety of tools that clients can trial and error over time to help improve their habits. But I think the ones that will be most beneficial to listeners today is to gain an understanding of pattern interrupts and habit stacking. So when we're looking at a pattern interrupt with binge eating disorder, basically you're breaking an individual's thoughts, habits, behaviours to literally shake up the neurological pathway that we've created. So when we look at pattern interrupts, we need to acknowledge what the actual cue is. So you need to know what it is, right? So that might be, hey, I know it's every Friday night, whatever. That way we know when we can try and break up the routine and basically how to avoid that behaviour of overeating. So last week I used the example, I think, of breaking up with a partner or having a fight with a partner. It's actually very common to become what we call emotional eating. So emotional eating is essentially a very typical habit that forms or can form in our teenage years, having a fight with a family member or a partner and then kind of resorting to food just to feel comfort, right? As that happens, we create that neurological link that we spoke about last week. We're going A to B. It might strengthen over time as different emotions come up and it gets stronger and stronger.
Trampling that grass or building
Trampling the grass, exactly.
Yep.
So breaking patterns is really hard, but if we use an interruption, one that is very different to what we are used to, as soon as the cue presents itself, we can literally break down the routine. So let's say, for example, you're feeling sad, and this happens, once or twice a week. You feel sad, you get up, you go to the fridge, and then you eat something, you go sit back down, and then you come back up to the fridge, and it becomes a constant overeating process within that 2-hour period. This is a very common binge eating disorder scenario. So getting up, sitting down, getting up, sitting down, etc. If you are aware of this, you know that this happens every time that you're feeling sad. What we can do is look at breaking up the cue, okay? So what can we do as a person walks into the kitchen or towards the fridge that will literally confuse the brain? Okay, now some of the things that we do are wild, particularly if you live by yourself, you can do whatever you want. Dropping down and doing push-ups. Hey?
A shock collar?
Shock collar. Yeah, bang, damn, that's a good one. Dropping down, doing push-ups, singing, dancing, yelling a word out loud, and if you're like me, doing burpees. Burpees were part of my therapy for 2 years, and I can't explain how much confusion there was in my life when I just got up and started doing burpees in the living room. But I'm glad I lived by myself at that point. Again, let's be contextual here. I was living by myself, so no one saw what was going on. But this method was really effective because I was breaking the neurological pattern. It was so different from me getting up from going from the couch to the fridge. I was getting up, doing a burpee, and then being like, what the fuck? And then sitting back down. So, it sounds quite simple, but it really can confuse you, and it does break up that pattern. So it's this concept of trying to find something that's so different and so out of routine, that'll help kind of rewind the loop that you created. So another good example, and this is again is
Which
one
is,
that I've had.
I like to think about it like a circuit, right? Like you know, if with electricity you create a circuit and it fires off the light bulb. So it's the same thing here. Like if you can break that circuit somewhere along that line, then, you know, you get a different result, right?
Yep, exactly. And this next one is, again, a very, very common one that we find with clients is that I'm going to use alcohol as an example. So say on Fridays, you come home after work, you pour yourself a drink to relax, you sit in your spot on the couch and you find that 2 glasses turns into 4. Okay, it becomes a habit. It's coming every Friday, but you're sick of it. You're sick of waking up feeling like crap on a Saturday. Now, what we can do here is look at the routine and also look at the cue. So the cue is the Friday. The cue is actually the day of the week. But you know that it happens when you get home, and you know that it happens when you sit on the couch. So a very easy pattern interrupt here could be as simple as physically moving yourself from one spot on the couch to another. So placing a blanket, some pillows, a book in the usual spot on the couch on the Friday morning before you leave work, bam, pattern interrupt. Physically and visually interrupting your usual pattern means that you're creating a different routine when you get home in the evening. It could mean another pattern interrupt could be driving home a different way. Okay, you're interrupting the normal pattern. So when you get home from work, you pour yourself your wine or you're sitting in a completely different spot in the house, you've broken up that circuit that you were just talking about because you're doing something completely different. Very, very simple tool, and it's one, this is why I wanted to kind of give this one today, because it's one that all you need to do is look at the day itself and be like, this is what typically happens in order, and then at the end of the day, this is what happens. So let's try and add in things throughout the day to try and interrupt. Putting your keys in a different spot can make a difference. Like really, really small things can change that circuit.
What about like changing your, like moving the furniture around in the house? Could that
100%.
have the same effect? Yeah.
Yep. Moving the beanbag from one spot to another where you usually sit on it. Having someone else sit in your normal spot will make a difference. At the dinner table, same thing. Switch seats. If you find that you're overeating at dinner, sit in a different spot. So pattern interrupts are a very effective method to stop overeating and binge eating in particular, because you're using different tools here to break up that pattern.
Cool. What have we got next?
Habit stacking. So we're still looking at the concept of habit loops and the importance of it, but looking now at habit stacking over a long term. For those that don't know this concept, I know you've done a podcast on this, but essentially is building momentum from one small habit to another so it eventually becomes automatic. Now, in the simplest of terms, it's like sticking a new habit to an old one. So for example, let's say you've had surgery and you have to do scar management with moisturizer every night. In order to remember, the easiest thing to do would be to stick the moisturizer next to something you already do every night, like next to the toothbrush and toothpaste, because that's going to mean you're implementing it with ease. You're not really thinking about it. Boom, it happens. You're sticking it next to something. When we look at habit stacking over the long term, we can see the benefit it has to people's progress around thoughts and behaviours, both negatively and positively. So an example here, I think, negatively of is the use of phones. So if we look at when we had phones 15 years ago and we were using 3310 Nokias, how little we were using it then, to over the years getting fancier and fancier phones, to how much we rely on it and use it now. Okay, so that's actually a process of habit stacking. So on that topic, going back to phones, we can look at the use of reducing phone times, the positive side of things that have helped reduce self-sabotaging behaviours for myself and for my clients, both with binge eating disorder and in particular body dysmorphic disorder. So while I said before, putting the moisturizer next to something, that's a small, easy daily habit stack. When we're looking again at the process of recovery, things take time. So over 7 years, I've reduced my social media usage down to like under 10 minutes a day. Because what I would find is social media would create algorithms that tempted me with food. Same with my clients. You look at one thing that's delicious and then it just keeps coming up. You're constantly like bombarded with cookies and cupcakes. And when you're trying
social media is an echo chamber.
Yeah. When you're trying to beat that urge and you're constantly seeing cookies, guess what? You're going to want to act on it. So that in conjunction with things like physique competitors, bodybuilders, CrossFitters constantly being on my feed and on my clients' feeds, that concept of that athletic figure that might not be, achievable for those of us that aren't athletes on a daily basis anymore, really, really hard to deal with. So that negative feeling for me fed into my binge eating disorder. So what I would do is I would wear large shirts because I felt crap about myself, and then I would overeat because I was like, no one can see me anyway because I'm wearing big moo-moos. And then I'd constantly talk myself down. So I had two things happening. I had my body dysmorphic disorder going off, being like, you look like shit because you don't look like those athletes. And then I had myself being like, well, just wear big shirts and overeat because no one sees you anyway. So here, like I said, I'm unraveling two concepts of these psychoeducational components. So what I did to habit stack was, over the years, go through a process. So in 2015, for example, I went off Facebook. I went off for the year. I've never been back on it. So that habit stuck. In 2016, I decided, okay, no screen time for the first 20 minutes of every day. I don't want to influx, myself with influences and stuff. That stuck. So in 2017, I was like, okay, no screen time for the last 30 minutes of the day. That has stuck. 2018, I started doing digital detoxes every 2 weeks. That stuck. 2019, I was like, all right, let's remove all my, in brackets, friends and influencers from my feed. Just delete them. That stuck. 2020, it made my life much easier to just go off my personal Instagram. I was like, forget it. I don't need it anymore. Go to business page. That's it. So now, 2021, I've only got the business page and I can just time limit under 10 minutes because I follow 3 things, which is the news and the New York bucket list, and nothing comes up in my feed. I have nothing to look at. So I just post what I need to post and see you later.
Yep. So everything you're doing has an intent.
100%.
I think that's important. Yeah, I think that's important because, for the listeners, you didn't just go, I'm going to do all of this shit at once.
Exactly.
This is what I love about the fitness industry, right? Like, there's so many fucking principles that carry over to everything else in life. And that is, like, goal setting. That is having intent with what you're doing. That is progressive overload, right? You're looking at frequency, intensity, like time when you're doing things and all that type of stuff. There's so many principles that carry over, and that progressive overload is super important. Whenever you want to change anything, first you need to be aware, then you need to know exactly where you are, then set goals, set a direction that you want to be moving in, and then go, what's one thing that I can do that's going to make everything else easier or unnecessary? And that first thing you did was like, went off Facebook. And then you, as you said, that stuck. All right, cool. What's the next thing? Boom. Don't use my phone for the first 20 minutes a day. All right, cool. If I can do that consistently, what's the next thing that I can do? What's the next thing that I can do? What's the next? And it's been a 6-year process for you.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I say to people, like, people are like, your clients have been with you so long. And I'm like, because this is a process. This isn't a quick fix. So, again, another example of habit stacking with a client who I've got who, she's recovered now, had body dysmorphic disorder. In 2016, she was weighing herself every day, and more than once a day. So she was getting on the scale, she was getting upset, etc. So what we had to go through was this process of habit stacking. So for 2016, what we did was like, okay, I'm going to let you get on the scale. It's going to be once a day and once a day only. But keep accountable to me. And that's what she did. That stuck. By 2017, I was able to reduce it a little bit. Let's make it 5 times a week. Keep accountable to me.
Yeah, let's just pause there for a second as well. Sorry to cut you off, but I think this is important to note as well is, I've done the same thing with some of my clients, and the educational component is so important there because when you can explain to people, hey, if you're going to jump on the scales, do it at the same time every day. Do it first thing in the morning when you get out of bed, because if you test first thing in the morning and then you test, a couple of hours later before you train, then you check again a couple of hours later and a couple of hours later after, meals and things like that, like there's going to be fluctuations throughout the day. And if you, don't understand that carbohydrate intake, glycogen storage, sodium intake, stress and training and hydration levels and nutrition, all that type of stuff, all of that stuff affects like your gravitational pull, which is your weight, right? It doesn't, that weight, that number on the scale doesn't tell you what that composition is, like where is that weight coming from? And there's so many factors that are involved in that. So do you mind just touching on that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, that for us comes into that very beginning phase of behavioural weight loss therapy. I talk about the scale a lot and like, this is what happens, this is why it fluctuates. Let's not expect it to move every week because your menstrual cycles, it's going to go up. Hey, you've had more sodium because you've eaten ramen. Okay, if you're eating sodium bombs, guess what? Your weight's going to go up. Glycogen, if you've had a deload week and then go back into training, all these things that affect your body weight. So it's really nice to see people understand that concept. And then, I'll talk about what I did with this client here, but on the other side of things, I have some clients actually now that weigh daily and it doesn't affect them at all because it's like, oh, look, I looked at my sleep, I had 4 hours and today my weight's through the roof. So people use it as data. The scale becomes data. When we're looking at the body dysmorphic disorder client that I'm talking about here, it was a little bit different. It was, she was actually quite extreme. So I wanted to pull her off it so she was focusing less and less on image and relating her image to, or her value, I should say, to the number on the scale. So in 2017, we reduced it to 5 times a week. In 2018, we went down to 3. And then in 2019, we actually went off and just did waist measurements and photos. And now, so 2 years later, she's recovered. She's able to do a weekly weigh-in, photos, measurement, and it doesn't destroy her day, which is really amazing because and how many years was that? It's 5 years. 5 years that took. So again, rewinding these processes, it takes time. It really does.
Yep. Yeah, that's great, Kat. Where are we going to go from here?
The next concept, the psychoeducational component, is language. This is really important for recovery because it involves our environment significantly. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay. So when we're talking about language and our environment, it's literally, who we hang out with, who we speak to, the things we see, read, listen to, where, how we're educated. And I know you and I can go down rabbit holes here. So what I'll do is I'll stick particularly with food linguistics and the power of what we educate ourselves with, particularly with, the tools we use at Macros Muscles Mindset. So last week we spoke about how language can affect our choices and our behaviors. So essentially, if you're using words, if we look at the concept of language, what we can do is use words to break down your own habits, to improve your actions around food or your thoughts around body image. So if you consider food as clean and junk, or healthy and naughty, but start to then make a conscious decision to view food as literally just food and simply remove the concepts and terminologies like good and bad and naughty and junk, what you're doing is able to produce different feelings that challenge your old habits and thoughts. So you're changing your current vocabulary and assemblages in your mind to create basically questions or considerations around your behaviors. Because what you're doing here is you're juggling or you're thinking about your wording differently to how you have been for the last, whatever it is, 25, 30 years. Because if you've grown up with that concept of good and bad, or restrict during the week, you've created habit loops and negative associations with food. So bringing in food linguistics and trying to change how you speak about food and what you see and read about food is really important because it can literally change your entire behaviors and habits around it. So one of our major focuses is ensuring that there's a variety and balance on a daily basis to help reduce the feelings of restriction, right? So we have a really strong shift on removing the word cheat meal and cheat day from vocabulary because for us, the word or the words cheat day creates an association that you've done something wrong or that you're eating something wrong or something, naughty in comparison to other days of the week. So the fact is with binge eating disorder, you want to be able to eat balanced. You want to eat delicious things and less nutrient-dense things any day of the week without feeling like you're restricting yourself or without feeling like you have to go overboard on the weekend. you know, or particularly if you're at celebrations or hang on vacations and stuff like that. So when foods, you know, are unique to a table setting and you've said all week, no, it's much easier to then be like, oh my God, yes, when it's presented
and
to you.
That ties into that all or nothing mindset we spoke about earlier.
Exactly. So if you create a balance with nutrient-dense and less nutrient-dense food on a daily basis, the feeling of restriction actually dissipates. So this, in turn, just reduces the urge to binge or overeat.
Mm-hmm. So you're allowing yourself to have less nutrient-dense foods every now and again. And this, I think that's a great point. I think that's a great tactic, is like, you know, most people are on this perpetual fucking hamster wheel where they eat really clean, they're restricting throughout the week, they're dialed in with their sleep, their nutrition, their training, etc., and then come the weekend, they're like, sweet, I can let myself go a little bit now, and they let their hair down and, you know, go from eating whatever 1,500 calories every day throughout the week to fucking banging out 3,000 calories both days, Saturday, Sunday. You know, and that's that. Yeah, it's that all or nothing mindset, that restrict binge. Whereas, you know, if you can give people the tools and say, hey, you know what, like, if you are focusing on calories and macronutrients, then cool. Like, we can take elements of, like, if it fits your macros and go, hey, you know what, like, you've moved a little bit more on a Wednesday, you've trained a little bit harder, you've had good sleep, you know, you've had, you know, 4 or 5 more nutrient dense meals in a row. We can use that 80-20 rule. Now you can give yourself a little bit of flexibility and go, you know what, you can have something a little bit less nutrient dense, okay? And then you're kind of planning for it, right? And you're putting that into your week rather than, you know, kind of getting that urge and then acting upon it and then feeling like shit and then creating that cycle again. You're going, you know what, I can have this, okay? I'm going to put some rules and regulations around that. And then you're adding that into your day, knowing that, you know what, I've done the right thing the majority of the time. I'm going to allow myself to be a little bit flexible here. And then, cool, I've satisfied that. Now I'm going to make better decisions more often than not. And you're setting up those wins. You're creating achievements.
Yeah, exactly. That exactly spot on. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to be able to relate to exactly what you just said, because that is one of the most common things that we see at Macros Muscle Mindset. And, you know, we work with a lot of ex-athletes, and it's a very similar concept where it's like, you know, we trained 6 days of the week, and then our 7th day was like we were absolutely shattered. So all we did was eat all day as part of recovery. But then when we went to training on Monday, I couldn't hit the lacrosse ball because I had a sugar fog. Right? Yeah. Literal stories. Like, this is
inflammation's up, you're feeling foggy, you're feeling lethargic.
Parched, etc., etc. So, yeah, that concept of all of nothing, it all ties back to it. So the next thing, I guess, with linguistics is being mindful of what you read, when you read it, what you listen to, and what you see. So, you know, I know you're big on this too, particularly around social media, but, you know, even when you read the news, can have an impact on how your day sets up, right? Because if you're constantly reading negative things, if you're looking at Instagram and you're seeing the next detox, the next fast, the next 6 weeks challenge, guess what? You're waking up, that's the first thing that you see. That's getting indoctrinated into your head. Like, you know, social media drives me nuts.
Yeah. And then, to add to that point, you know, I don't use my phone for the first couple of hours of the day. Like, I don't set a time for when I'm going to use my phone, right? Like, I get up in the morning, I write out my schedule. I'm like, right, I'm going to do this. Once I've done those things, then I can use my phone. But then I'm using it with intent, right? And like, for me, the reason I started doing that was because, you know, as you said before, like, you start implementing these small changes. And like, many years ago, I read the book, The One Thing, and it's like, what's the one thing that you can do that's going to make everything else easier or unnecessary? And I was like, I want to do this. And that was like, I was building my website at the time. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to get up a little bit earlier. All right, what's the one thing that I can do that's going to allow me to get up a little bit earlier? Well, I'm going to go to bed a little bit earlier. Okay, what's the one thing I can do that's going to help me get blah, 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 blah. All right, I'm going to turn my phone off at this time. And that ended up being the one thing, right? And it's like, and for me, that, exactly, habit stacking, right? And it was a process. It took a little bit of time. It took a few months it took a little bit of time to figure that out. But then it was like, you know, all right, I'm going to turn my phone off 20 minutes before I go to bed. And then it was 40 minutes before I go to bed. And then it's an hour before I go to bed. And like, that stuck. And I notice when I don't do that, you know, there's a couple of weeks ago where I was kind of letting myself slip a little bit, but I had backstops. I was like, all right, my sleep patterns are a little bit worse than what they have been, and I can feel that creeping into my day. And I was looking at my again, the data, and I was seeing what was going on. I was seeing those patterns, I was seeing those trends, and I was like, all right, well, I've stopped doing this, and then this has flowed over into this, and this has flowed over into this. Now I need to start doing that again. You know, so I think that's a great point. Is like, you know, we want to be starting the day on the front foot, being proactive rather than being reactive.
And you know, this leads exactly into the next thing that I want to talk about in linguistics. Is part of what we get our clients to do is habit stack with creating a daily intention. You know, it's one of the first things that they do. So we call it the Mindset for Success tool. So basically, it's using the right language for the day ahead. The Mindset for Success tool is a tool that can help you keep on track for, you know, particularly if, you know, you have disordered eating habits, is, you know, things where you can feel anxious around food. So big events, vacations, things like weddings, etc. We kind of started this tool on those days. You know, we habit stack it from that to then maybe once a week to then maybe 3 times a week to then, you know, every day. But it's about installing and learning that intention can create good habits for the day and then for the future. So, for example, waking up and writing down success at the end of the day would look like it's going to help you reinstate what you were thinking about achieving for the day. So again, we go day by day. We're not looking far ahead. We're not saying success would look like in 6 months being binge eating disorder free. No, we're saying success at the end of the day is enjoying mum's cooking and having one cookie and going to bed, you know. Or it might be success would be having alcohol this evening and not having dessert. So, you know, it differs for people. It differs on their days. So that's why it's like, okay, let's habit stack this. Let's put it in for the days that you know are harder for you, which might be Friday, Saturdays. And then, hey, let me know what it is. I'll check in with you at the end of the day. Let's see how you go. Did you stick to your intention? And more often than not, it's yes. And then we build on that, we grow on that, and we try and make it a daily habit. And again, it's a habit stack. It takes time. But it's like, okay, let's pull off the phone first thing in the morning and let's set ourselves up with intention. Let's put our goals out and let's try and be that 1% better than yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, and a big point I want to make here is you need to make it achievable, right? It needs to be like just a little bit challenging, but also like, you know, if you wake up with intention, it also needs to be achievable so that you can, you know, go to the calendar and put a mark on the calendar. I've won today. I've won today. I've won today. And that's it. That's all we need to do is we need to stack win upon win upon win upon win. So we need to find tools that are going to allow us to do that, because if you do the right thing in quotation marks, or you stack these wins upon wins, and you do that more than you know, fall to these cravings, then that's a good day. You've just won the day. If you can do that over the week, you've now won the week. You do that over the month, you've now won the month. And then you've won the year, so on and so forth. I've got a number of coaches that I've got on board as online coaching clients as somewhat of a mentorship. And one of my mates is on board at the moment. I'm training him for a jiu-jitsu tournament. But, you know, I was talking to him about his online coaching business, and he was saying that one of his clients he was looking at her food diary, and her food diary was like, I had McDonald's 4 times this week, and she was happy with that. And when he got onto a call with her, he's like, oh, talk to me about this. And she goes, you know what? Like normally I eat McDonald's 10 times a week. Wow. I only had it 4 times this week. Yeah. And he's like, that's fucking awesome. That's a win. Like, he's not completely cutting it out. She's not cutting it out. She's not like restricting. It's just like, hey, I'm going to improve upon this. And that's what people need to think about, is like, we're working towards progress, not perfection.
100%. And the thing is, you know, the process of recovery, like I said at the beginning, it's not linear. So it's like, there are going to be setbacks and there are going to be times where you give in to that urge, but using the tools that we focus on,
and that's okay.
It is.
That's okay. As long as you're aware of it and you've got those backstops and you can go, all right, cool. how long am I going to let this go on for? Because that's the thing, is like, you know, once you create momentum in either direction, that momentum just keeps snowballing. So, you know, if you fall victim to, you know, one of these cravings, and then you allow that to define you, you have this all or nothing mindset, then it's much easier to make another poorer decision and another poorer decision, another poorer decision. And like, the further you veer off that track, the more difficult it is to get back onto that track and start creating these positive habits that are moving you in the right direction.
And particularly with binge eating disorder, if you're in a state where it's severe to extreme, the concept of recovery, and like you fall back a lot. And, you know, that complication of self-sabotage and, you know, what you're self-talking to yourself can be really, really hard to overcome. So at one point I was suicidal because I was like, I can't live this way anymore. And that was the breaking point for me. That's when I was like, I need help, because I will drive off the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Like, that's where I was at. So, you know, that was the extreme point. Like, that's when I was like, what the hell is this? And I then sought a Neuro-Linguistic practitioner. But it's like, we don't want people to get to that point. This is why we're doing this podcast, is like, let's try and get the education out there now about what it actually is and how you can try and improve on it in these beginning steps. And then, hey, if these tools and techniques don't work, let's then look at getting some professional, you know, help and therapy. So, you know, as I said, yeah, it's not linear, but people need to just know that you've got to keep going, because these issues, eating disorders, are curable, which is great, which is an amazing thing to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about understanding that, you know, you're on a path. It's a journey. And like you said, sometimes you are going to veer off that track, right? Like, most people go, I need to go from A to Z, and they think they just go in a fucking straight line. Like, it never happens.
Absolutely
like that.
Not.
Yeah, there's going to be
gone in a straight line.
Yeah,
my plan B is usually better than plan
A. and that's the point that I'm making, is like, you know, if we want to go from point A to point Z, like, we need to understand there's not a linear process, and we're going to be walking in that. Hey, this is where I am right now. That's where I need to be over there. I just need to start moving in that direction. The tools that I use are going to be different, right? And I need to, as you said, trial and error. We need to figure out these tools that are going to work for us. And maybe that means, you know, being aware of how you talk to yourself. That might be the first thing. Maybe it's, you know, putting the scale away. Maybe it's reducing how many times you're eating McDonald's a week, or whatever it might be. Like, all these tools are going to be different, but you need to find the tool. You need to come up with the tool and set that goal, put some rules and regulations around what you're doing, okay, and then go, you know what, I've done the right thing, I've done what I know is right, and I've started building discipline. That's an important thing, right? It's like building discipline, because if you give in to all of your cravings all the time, that is the path of least resistance, right? That gets easier and easier and easier to fall into that pattern again. So we need to start building discipline around, you know, giving these parameters that we need to work within. Yeah. And it's creating those rules and regulations that you can achieve. So you're setting yourself up for win after win after win. And as long as you do that the majority of the time, then you're on the right path. You know, there is going to be times when things are going really well. Sweet. Keep moving in that direction. Tweak, refine, adjust. But then there's going to be times when, you know, life gets in the way, and, you know, you're fucking stressed out. You're under the pump at work. Your relationship's falling apart. You've got financial issues, whatever, right? Those are the times where you go, all right, cool. These are my non-negotiables. I need to be aware of where I'm at. I need to be aware of some of these habits that are starting to creep back in. Some of these potentially bad habits that are creeping back in, and some of the good habits that I've started building, they're starting to move back out of my routine, right? And then we've got these backstops that go, all right, when I get to this point, I know that I'm going too far, right? And the more I allow myself to continue down that path, the further off track I'm going to go, the harder it's going to be to get back on track, the longer it's going to take.
Yeah. And, you know, the discipline comes from that habit stacking, and I think it's really important that people understand that boundaries are there for you. They're not there to... People shouldn't... I understand where people can get annoyed with particular boundaries, but it's also like, if you set out initially and be like, hey, I have some boundaries in place that help me be a better person, or help me, whatever it is, might be,
manage whatever I'm managing. Yeah.
You manage what I'm managing. This is how it is. So, for me, I'm like, guys, get out of my house at 9 p.m. I'm sorry, that's when my phone goes down. I go to bed. I want to be asleep by 10 because I'm up at 4:50. Like, people are paying me money to be there at 5:30. I want to be sharp. I want to be on the ball. This is a non-negotiable. Like, get out of my house. Obviously there's times where it's flexible. Like, I'm not like that on the weekend. But, yeah, Monday to Thursday, leave. But people are aware of it. People respect it. They understand it because I said it literally as soon as they're here, or I'll text it. I'll be like, hey, just letting you know, if you're coming at 7, I need you. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go around 9.
Yep.
It is what it is.
Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. What's the next thing you want to discuss?
So the last thing is the final, well, it's not the final because there's actually 5, but we're going to go on topic 4, which is progressive mindfulness. Now, with progressive mindfulness, the tool that I'm going to touch on is mindful eating, which can be used for anyone at any time. And I know that you've actually done a podcast on this before, so there'll be a bit of overlap. But basically, mindful eating is helping to empower you to make healthier choices. And it's not like dieting. It's not like constant tracking. What it's doing is bringing an awareness to the relationship you have with your food. So it's paying attention and it's being purposeful. So basically, once you adopt the ability to eat mindfully, you begin to acknowledge that there's no right or wrong to eating. Again, it's that concept of nutrient dense, less nutrient dense, and there are varying degrees around, experiences of food. There's times where it's like, wow, this food is an experience. I'm here with my family. It's a cultural event. And you're being mindful of it, So
that is such a great point, because we have this association with different things, right? Like, a lot of people eat for, what's the word? They eat for taste.
Yeah.
How does this food taste? It's funny, like, working with different clients, athletes are eating for performance. They look at food as fuel. All right, is this food going to give me the fuel required to fuel my training, fuel my performance, fuel my recovery? Whereas a lot of people are eating for the
pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, interesting.
So when we're mindful of the process of eating, we notice that we can also be, the satisfaction that comes from food is different. So if we bring mindfulness to eating, we use all our senses to be present in the moment. So you're tasting, you're savoring it, you're enjoying it, rather than just like eating really fast and scoffing it down and being like, did I just eat? So, a lot of people now eat quickly. They eat with a phone in their hands. They're eating when they're driving. They're eating walking around New York and eating. I can't have a concept to me. I'm like, how are these people eating kebabs and like walking along the street? Eating on trains. So basically, mindful eating is slowing down and bringing yourselves to the present moment. And that automatically calms you down. It can reduce the amount that you're eating, and you're getting the benefit of experiencing food differently because you're using your senses and you're actually feeling full without having to go overboard or overeating. So we've got 5 little techniques that we use. One of them being scheduling the time. So if you're at home, you've got Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, hey, block out 10 minutes, put your phone, your laptop away, sit down at a table and eat. Sit down. It makes a massive difference. The second one is making sure that you're not standing and grazing in the kitchen. So again, it comes back to this concept of pull whatever you're wanting to snack on to the table and sit and eat it and enjoy it. Like if you want to have some, nibblies and cheese, bring it to the table so you're not standing in the kitchen randomly eating it and not really enjoying the experience of your beautiful West Australian camembert, The third one is putting all screens away, so phones especially, turning it face down, moving it away from you, avoiding distraction so you can focus on what's in front of you, you can focus on the smell, the taste, and just slow down. And then with each bite you take, taking the time to chew, because a lot of people, particularly if they're walking, you're eating and you might be having 2 or 3 bites and then it's going straight down. So thinking about the pace of your eating patterns is really important. So we really focus on putting the knife and fork down between your chewing. So if you're at a restaurant, literally cut it up, put it in your mouth, and then put your knife and fork down. And it makes a massive difference to how fast you eat. And you'll notice over time, as you habit stack this, how quickly other people eat and how quickly people go to second helpings, especially if there's things in front of you, because they haven't put the knife and fork down and haven't chewed their food properly. So, this was a game changer for me, putting the knife and fork down. And I mean, it's become a habit over time. I'm much slower at restaurants. My sister used to make fun of me because I would eat so fast at the kitchen table when I was young, because I would just like scoff food down. And I'd be like, you eat so slow. But hey, guess what? She's always put a knife and fork down between bites. Like, it makes a massive difference. The fifth tool, the final one, I use with people that are really struggling with control. So again, if you're at like a buffet, or you've got lots of food in abundance in front of you, putting the knife and fork down is great. But if you actually switch your knife and fork into the opposite hand, firstly, no one notices because I do this all the time. But again, it slows you down even further. So you're taking longer to cut up and chew your food because you're actually having to be mindful of like, oh my God, everything's in a different hand. So you're having to slow down just from that. So basically what you're doing, each of these techniques works on, if not all of the components of mindfulness, because you're being present, so you're focusing on your food, the senses, reducing autopilot actions. You're having purpose, so you're being deliberate with the actions, intentions, and you're reducing impulses. And at the same time, you're almost like you're being non-judgmental with your food because you're enjoying it. You're enjoying the sight, the taste, and the experiences around you. So, there's a couple of things there that you can pull into your daily life and just, hey, habit stack it. Try this week on Friday and Saturday, put your knife and fork down at the restaurant. See how it goes. If it works, boom, do it next week. If that works, okay, the next week after that, put all your screens away and just habit stack on it. Build and build and build.
Another point that I want to make about mindful eating as well is, you talked about it before where people are like walking along eating a kebab in New York City. And it's like, people need to understand the autonomic nervous system as well, like the sympathetic state and the parasympathetic state. The sympathetic state is like our fight or flight state, right? Like, and most people live in this state throughout the day. When we're eating food, when we're sleeping, when we're drinking, etc., we want to try and drive the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So this is our rest and digest, because how many people have a hard training session and then they're like, I can't eat for hours afterwards? And that's because your sympathetic nervous system's still jacked up, right? That means that your body's going to be pushing resources and nutrients away from the digestive system because you're in this sympathetic state. Your body wants to, run away from a threat or fight it off. So when we go through mindful eating, we slow down, we focus on our breath, we're paying attention to what we're doing. That's going to drive the parasympathetic nervous system. That's then going to allow your body to then be able to digest, absorb, assimilate those nutrients much more efficiently. And adding on to that, this is where, maybe you chew your food 30 times before you swallow it, or whatever it might be. That's going to allow your food to be pre-digested, because that is part of the digestive system, right? It's like our senses pick up on food. All right, we're about to have food. We can smell it. We can see it. Our body starts producing saliva, and it starts getting the gastric juices of the stomach moving in the right direction, so that we're essentially preparing the body to be able to take in this food and be able to process it, right? And when you're not being mindful, when you're not taking that time to think about what you're doing and paying attention to where you're at right now, like, you miss that process. And this is where people will have digestive issues. Maybe they're always eating on the fly and they're like, I'm not getting enough nutrients. Their bodies like literally cannot break that food down. Maybe they get indigestion or bloating or, poor energy levels or energy crashes after meals and things like that. So I think, as you said before, like paying attention to what you're doing and how food affects you, right? Like I always say to my clients, I'm like, the importance of, tracking your food is, one, to see how much you're eating, to see if you're getting enough energy in to support your body, right? Because we want to thrive, not just survive, right? And then, cool, am I you can start picking up on intolerances and things like that. Hey, I get energy crashes at this time in the morning. Hey, maybe something I'm having in my breakfast, my body doesn't agree with. Maybe there's some gluten in there or some dairy in there or some eggs or something that my body doesn't quite, can't quite deal with, right? So we're starting to pay attention to how food affects us. And sometimes, and here's the thing, we don't talk about good foods and bad foods, but once you start connecting dots and you go, when I eat this, I feel good. Cool. I'm going to eat more of that shit. When I eat this, I feel bad. I feel sluggish. I feel lethargic. All right, maybe I start reducing some of those things.
Yeah, that's exactly spot on, and that all falls into the concept of progressive mindfulness. And again, that's something else that has lots of tools and techniques to work with. But I think for the audience, just understanding the concept of mindful eating and some of those basic tools like slowing down and literally sitting at a table can be really, really beneficial. So, I guess we can kind of tie things up there.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Do we need to do another episode, or is that's it for the series?
I think that's it for the series for binge eating disorder. There's probably a couple of references for people that I have that would be really good in terms of books, particularly if you've listened to this episode and you're resonating with some of what I've said. One of them is a book called You Are Not Your Brain. Excellent book for addiction. So it does talk about gambling, alcohol, and binge eating disorder. It's by Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz and Rebecca Glading. The second book, and I cannot recommend this enough, and any podcast you can find with this man, Dr. Ethan Kross has written a book called Chatter. It's about basically calming your mind down, how you talk to yourself, challenging your self-thought, and literally it's all about language and linguistics. So it feeds into what I was talking about earlier about what you read, how you speak to yourself, who you speak with, and how it can affect your actions and behaviors. And the last one, which I know we've talked about this plenty of times, but Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yep, awesome. I'll have all of those links in the show notes. Where can people find you, Kat?
macrosmusclesmindset.com.au. The Instagram handle, if you catch me under those 10 minutes, is the @macrosmusclesmindset. If you want to get in touch, just hit the email button. It's the easiest way to contact me.
Nice. I've also got a couple of resources, which I'll have in the show notes. We touched on just gut health just then. So I'll have that podcast episode linked. Also mindfulness, which is part of the Swiss 8 mini-series that I've done. So I'll have a couple of those linked in the show notes as well. But Kat, as always, a pleasure chatting to you, getting your thoughts on these things and the tools that you're using for yourself and with your clients.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate being able to speak to the people about this because it's, super important concept and there's not that much help out there at the moment in terms of like where to find the psychoeducational component. So really glad that we've been able to do this series.
Absolutely. Love it, Kat. Thank you very much.
Bye.
And there we have it, guys. Great conversation with my friend Kat Yiannakis of Macros Muscles Mindset to round out our 3-part mini-series on binge eating disorder. Always a good conversation with my friend Kat. I appreciate her reaching out to put together some quality content so we can get it out there to the wider public to start identifying and addressing any potential implications that come up around binge eating disorder. All of the topics that we discussed over the last 3 episodes will be linked in the show notes, as well as Kat's website and her Instagram handle. This episode was brought to you by Swiss 8, which is a proactive mental health program designed by veterans initially to allow people to structure in and schedule 8 pillars of health and wellness to allow them to be better at life. Go onto their website, download the app, and start putting these processes in place on a daily basis to allow you to be at your best. Any 5-star ratings and reviews are much appreciated. Much love, guys. Peace.